Hi, I'm Ali Hargreaves and welcome to Workshop in a Box. I'm going to be introducing you to watercolours and all the techniques that we can do. Everything from how to use the paint to what the paper is and all of those sorts of things. So I'll introduce you first of all to what we've got. We've got some paper. This is watercolour paper, especially for watercolour. I've already got one taped here, so I'm going to put that aside. You've got a beautiful SAA watercolour brush. They're very special. They hold the colour really well. You don't just have ordinary brushes for watercolour. These hold the colour. They keep the wet colour for a long time. It's got a really nice point on it, so we can do lots of different things with that brush. You've got a pencil. This is a 2B pencil, so it's soft but not too soft, and it's great for drawing. And then we've got the paints. Now these are called pans. Sometimes you can get them in tubes, but these are pans. That is a very handy little thing over the top that tells you what the colours are, the names of the colours. If you just put that aside, then the colours are there. You've got an extra brush in the pot here, and this has a protective cover on it. It's a little bit finer, it's a smaller brush, so that's quite good for detail. So we've got a water pot full of water, you need that. You can get water pots from the SAA if you want to, or you could use a jam jar. Then paper towel, that's really important. Have that handy at all times, we need that. Now, first of all, I'm assuming that you've never used watercolour before, so bear with me if you've just had a dabble. Now what I'm going to do is wet this brush in the water. I'm going to take that across to a colour. I'm actually going to choose Prussian blue. Before I do that, I'm just going to do this with the water. Don't do this and dry it really well. We don't want to do that. And we equally don't want it held where the water's just dripping from the brush. You need to take it across, dab it once like that, and that'll be enough water on the brush. Then take the Prussian blue and go right into it with the point of the brush. Keep going until you're getting a really lovely creamy colour in there. I'm actually just going to add a touch more water, get rid of the excess on there and add a bit more. You can actually see it working in the palette. Then bring that across to the paper. These are just techniques that we're doing now, and bring it on. That is a lovely dark tone because Prussian blue is a strong colour. And what I'm getting here is a very sharp line. I could do this, I could do really lovely shapes like that, and that's called a hard edge, like that. Now what I'm going to do is dip into the water, then I'm going to get rid of the excess again, and then whilst it's still wet, I'm going to pull that colour out. Look what's happening. Wet the brush again in the water, dab it off once on the paper towel, add more water. Now I'm not using the point, I'm using the side of the brush now. That was with the point of the brush, that gets a hard edge. Now we're getting what we call a soft edge, also known as wetting wet. Water on the brush, get rid of the excess, keep going. Water on the brush, get rid of the excess, keep going. Look what's happening to the colour. Water on the brush, get rid of the excess, keep going. Water on the brush. Let's see if we can get all the way to the end when it's still a little bit blue. But as you can see, we've gone from dark to light. More water, keep going. Do this constantly. Don't take a break in between, otherwise something else will happen, which I will talk about in a minute. Keep going until you've got no colour left at all and you're just getting pure water. It's happening, look, I'm nearly there. And there we go. So we've gone from a very, very dark colour to the white of the paper. That is wet on dry, that's wetting wet. Now I'm going to try a different colour, a medium tone colour. This is a dark colour. I'm now going to use alizarin crimson. I'm doing the same thing again. I've got a wet brush that I dried off slightly. I'm mixing it really well until it's nice and creamy in the palette. And then bring it across. This is not quite as dark as that, and it gets you to practice it. It's really important to practice these things. Look, I'm doing a shape there with the point of the brush like that. And then bring the colour with the side of the brush, like this. Wet the brush, dry it off a little bit. Bring the colour out. Wet the brush, dry it off once. Bring the colour across with the side of the brush. Wet the brush, dry it off, add the water. And again, and keep going until there's no more colour coming out. Now, this is why you use a watercolour brush. It holds a lot of colour for a long time. If you just use ordinary brush that's not made for watercolour, it doesn't work as well. So it's really good to have a lovely brush like this. Keep going. Very pale pink now. Brilliant for roses. And there we go, the white of the paper. So we've gone from dark to light. This is wet on dry, this is wet in wet. Now, I'm going to show you wet on damp. That does something rather special, I think. I'm going to use the ultramarine, get rid of the excess water. This is the ultramarine blue, this is a warm blue, whereas that Prussian blue is a cool blue. So I'm going to put this colour on here and I'm going to try and get an even colour now. This is an even colour all over, like that. And then what I want that to do is dry just a little bit. At the moment, it's wet. Let it dry just a touch, okay? So whilst it's drying, I'm going to put another one over here. So this is even colour, which is good practice. I'm using the side of the brush to get that going. Then, this should be damp. So it's not dry, but it's not really wet either. It's damp. I'm just looking. It should be just glistening if it's the right consistency. It's still a little bit wet at the moment, so I'm just going to wait. That one has actually dried quicker, so I'm going to do this with water. I'm just going to add some water to this, just a drop of water, so don't get rid of the excess this time, just drop that water in and hopefully you can see something happening. It's pushing the colour out and what's happening is the pigment is being pushed to the side. I'm just going to add a little bit more. It's really good fun to see this happening. Look, pushing that out. I'm going to have a go on this one with another colour. So I'm going to get some lemon. This is to show that you can put some colour on. This is very wet colour, so I'm not getting rid of the excess. I'm just dropping that colour in and see what happens with that. It's the same thing. So this is called wet and damp, which causes what we call cauliflowers, because the colour is being pushed to the edge. I'm going to add a little bit more water there so that you really see it working. That will only happen when you put wet colour or water into damp paint. So that's the first of our techniques. So it's now dried a little bit and you can really see what's happened here. Look how it's pushed the pigment to the edge. And it's a really lovely way of doing clouds, I think, really good fun. And here you could have some trees maybe into the blue sky. Lots of different things that you can try out, maybe a lake with the reflections and stuff. So then what I would do is right underneath what you've done. So hard edge here, soft edge here, dark to light, which is tone, and then here, wet in damp. So wet colour in damp, water in damp. So now I'm going to introduce you to green. It's an important colour. We have it everywhere outside. So in your pack, you've got two ready-made greens. One is called Viridian here, and this is called Leaf Green. They are both incredibly bright. Let's just explore. So remember, wet the brush, dry it off a little bit, get the Viridian, make it nice and creamy in the palette. This will give me the strongest colour that I possibly get, like that. So do the same thing, wet the brush, swish it around a bit and do that, just so that you see the lighter version of it. Yeah? That's Viridian. What I would do is write Viridian underneath. Then clean the brush really well because we're using another colour. Get rid of the excess water, mix it up. This is called Leaf Green. I would say this is a spring beach leaf green. It's very, very bright. Let's look. Yeah, don't get that many leaves this bright green, even though it's called bright leaf green. So wet the brush, swish it around, get rid of the excess, add some water, and we get a lighter colour. That's probably a little bit more natural looking. How do we actually make greens though? And I want to talk about that now because I think it's important. So we add two primary colours, blue and yellow, together to make green. But when we look at our palette, of course, we've got two yellows, we've got lemon, which is a cool yellow, and we've got cadmium yellow here, on here, which is a warm yellow. Underneath, we've got Prussian blue, which is a cool blue, and we've got ultramarine, which is a warm blue. So what we're going to do is a bit of an experiment, really. It's a bit like being a scientist in a way. So just dry that off, really nice and creamy with that lemon. This is the cool yellow. So right underneath, lemon, cool yellow. Just going to make a little bit more up there. Because it's a light colour, you need quite a lot of pigment on the brush. So that's lemon. Add a bit of water, you see it lights. And what I'm going to do is add Prussian blue to it. Now, Prussian blue is a very dark colour and very strong colour, whereas lemon is a light colour. So you don't need a lot of Prussian blue and you will get green. Look at that, that's a very dark green. It's almost blue. So I need to wet the brush, dry it off, get some more lemon, and now put the lemon into the blue. Now I'm getting more of a mid-colour green. But if I pull it out now, I'm getting a lighter version. Wet the brush, dry it off, add this, we get the water. So we get wetting wet for the green. This is something you need to practice again and again. The wetting wet is one of the most important techniques you'll find for watercolour. These two colours are cool, so they give us really bright greens. You know, spring greens really. So now what I'm going to do is use the warm yellow, that's the cadmium yellow, so I'm mixing that up, put that underneath. Now, warm yellow is closer to red on the colour wheel, so it has a little bit of red in it. I'm then going to add the ultramarine, which is a warm blue. So that, again, is closer to red on the colour wheel. When I add that, look at the difference in colour. Quite a difference. Of course, it's quite blue again. So wash the brush really well. Get the cadmium yellow, again, the warm yellow. So warm yellow, warm blue, add it, and then we'll find green. But look at the difference of the green. It's more like a conifer green, isn't it? There. Then, bring that out, maybe a little bit more of the blue, just to clean the brush first, a little bit more of the blue, just to get more of that colour coming out. So, we've now got two different greens. We've got dark version and a light version. The more yellow you put in, the more yellowy green it'll be. The more blue you put in, the more bluey green it'll be. And of course, it's very different using the different blues and yellows. So you can imagine there's a lot of different combinations there. We've got a ready-made green. Why don't we use it on its own? Well, on its own, it's a bit crazy, especially Viridian. It's known to be a pretty wild colour. But if we use it, let's just mix that colour up first. If we use it here and then add some yellow, so I'm going to actually use the warm yellow, cadmium yellow, because this is very bright and that will calm it down a bit. So if I add the cadmium yellow to it, I'm getting some very bright greens. That's because the Viridian is a very bright colour. If I used the lemon, it would be even brighter. So try that as well. But look at that, really lovely bright green. Almost fluorescent. Lovely. Okay, so that's the Viridian plus cadmium yellow. I want to make it bluer, so I'm going to get the Viridian again, nice and strong. Practice making that really strong colour, and then pull it out, wet the brush. If I add Prussian blue to it, I will get a bluer green. going a bit turquoisey. Maybe a little bit more of the viridian. You know, if it goes too blue, add some more of the green. And look at that lovely rich green you get. A bit more Prussian blue. You know, just keep going until you're happy. So quite a varied amount of different greens there. Now what I'm going to do is get the leaf green and do the same. So here's the leaf green. A bit more. As I say, that's really good practice, to keep on practicing, getting the consistency right. I'm going to add some lemon to it. And look how bright that gets. Then get the leaf green again. And this time I'm going to add some Prussian blue. Oh, look at that. That did the wet and wet thing really beautifully there. Bit more of the leaf green. So each time you change colour, make sure it's a clean brush. And look at that, that's a really nice green. So, write down which colours you've used, how you've made those colours, and experiment even further. Use more blues and yellows and add them to the greens. So there you have lots of different greens. So now more work on colour mixing. What we're going to do now is use the yellow and red to make orange. I'm choosing a warm yellow, cadmium yellow, and a warm red, which is your vermilion. But do experiment with the other yellows and reds. So, cadmium yellow, you will find that the warm yellow and the warm red will make a warmer orange. So that's why I'm starting with that. So we've got a nice cadmium yellow there, nice and creamy, plenty of colour. Do the same with the vermilion, which is a warm red. Add that to the yellow. Oh, look at that. That wet in wet is just working beautifully there. Look, it's going creeping into the yellow because it was so wet. So I've got the red is actually coming out quite a lot there, vermilion on its own. So clean the brush really well. More cadmium yellow. Add that on whilst it's still wet, and we get using the side of the brush, remember, to pull that out. So we're getting all sorts of different colours in there, and we're also practicing that wet and wet again. You know, just keep going with it and see how many different oranges, light, dark, all of those that you can make. So you've got two primary colours, yellow and red, making orange. Now let's look at blue and red. This time I'm going to use a cool red and a cool blue. So alizarin crimson is a cool red. It's also quite a dark red. So it's a little bit of a pinky red. It's getting towards purple already. So it will make a really nice purple. I'm going to add a cool blue, which is Prussian blue. I'm not making too much of this because Prussian blue is a very strong colour. So if I mix a lot of it, it's just going to take over with the red. If that happens, it doesn't matter. That's what you're learning from. Now let's just add that. Yes, I've done it. Bit strong. Never mind. Pull it out like this. We've got a really nice purple there. I'm going to add a little bit more Prussian blue and it will be very blue. And I'm exploring the different colours that I can make. More of the alizarin crimson, and look, I'm getting a really nice purple. So try the ultramarine, try different versions. Can you see how that hasn't really done the wet and wet thing? That was because that was already quite dry before I put the blue on. So if you want it to do the wet and wet thing, make sure it's all wet. Now, those are all primary colours mixed together to make secondary colours. But what I'm going to introduce you to now is a brown called burnt sienna. It's this one here in the corner. Burnt sienna and this one called yellow ochre, they are both what we call earth colours. That's because they come from the earth, so they're natural colours. Now this is a really lovely reddy brown. Mix it up really nice and strong, so not too much water, the strongest colour that you can make. Can you see how that's going on? Not very well. I've actually gone over the top. There's not enough water in there, so I need a bit more water, get rid of the excess, add it on. So you want a nice strong colour, but not so dry that it won't go on. There we go. That is burnt sienna. So right underneath, burnt sienna, earth colour. Then we're going to get ultramarine. Now ultramarine is your warm blue that we've already used, but this is also a natural colour. Always makes me think of Moroccan blue or Delft pottery in Holland. You know, really nice colour. Now if we mix these two together, watch what happens. Brown, bearing in mind, is made of 3 primary colours already. I'm putting it on here as dark as I can, the strongest tone that I can make, like that. Then clean the brush really well. Get the strongest ultramarine blue that you can, mix it up well in the palette and add it to the burnt sienna. And you will get what looks almost like black. Mixing it on the paper is a really good way of seeing what's happening to the colour. You can, of course, mix in the palettes here. There are wells for doing that, and sometimes that's useful. But today I want you to try it on the paper because you will see what's happening in front of you. Now, once you've got that colour really well mixed on the paper, clean the brush, get rid of the excess, pull that colour out, and you get a sort of browny colour coming out like that. That's because there's quite a lot of burnt sienna in there. If I then add more ultramarine to it, which I'm doing here, so I'm mixing it again with more ultramarine, wet the brush, dry it off, add the water. Now I'm getting more of a grey colour. So you can imagine you can get an awful lot of different browns and greys just by using the ultramarine and burnt sienna. It's a really good way of making what we call neutrals, and they are very useful. So that's more colour mixing for you. Do explore more. The more you do, the easier it gets. Remember, you can pause the video at any time and just have lots of fun. So now some more techniques. These wax resist sticks are great, so we're going to do something with that. And this is a resist method. So the wax resists the water. It's just like oil and water, they don't like each other. So if I was to draw something on the paper, you won't be able to see it, of course, so it'll be a surprise. Because it's white on white, it's clear. These are clear. I can do all sorts, dots, dashes, anything I want really. Don't quite know myself what it's going to look like. Press on quite hard to make sure that it works well, and then the magic occurs. You know, it's great, this. So get some Prussian blue, any colour you want really. A darker colour is better because it will show up more. Put that colour over the top. Oh, look at that, I love it. So, more water, a lighter colour over the top. You could even have another colour in there, you know, anything you want. Just seeing what happens. Now, we can actually use this wax resist over another colour. So what I'm going to do is put some leaf green on here. And this is all good practice of the colours and placing the colour on, getting nice strong colour. Let's get the strong leaf colour, leaf green. And then I need that to dry completely before putting the wax resist over. So I'm going to let that dry. And there's another one that we need to do to let it dry as well, which is going to be called the lifting off technique. So I'm going to use Viridian this time. Nice and strong. You know, practice getting those colours strong. It's something that some people find a little bit tricky if they don't learn it straight away. But if you're doing this straight away, that's marvellous. So I'm getting a nice even wash all over there in a box. And then I need that to dry. So we've got leaf green and we've got a Viridian. Just let those dry and go back to the resist method and the lifting off in a minute. What I want to show you now is something called the pulling out technique. So I'm going to use some Prussian blue. It's nice and strong. I'm going to make it nice and wet. So I'm going to put some Prussian blue on here, and then I'm going to add lots of water. It needs to be really wet, really flood it, but nice and strong as well. Maybe add a bit of green in there, so a little bit of Viridian in there as well. It's really wet. Add more water right on there so it's flooded. You can almost see a lip there. And then you can use something like a barbecue stick that's got a sharp point on it and pull out the colour like this. Look at that, just amazing. It'll work even more on this because this is on a slope, so it's wet that side and I can pull it out. Look, there's all sorts of amazing things you can do just with a barbecue stick. You can also use your pencil, to be honest, but then it gets a bit dirty, so I'm not going to do that. Another thing that the SAA sell is something called a ruling pen. This works a little bit like a quill. The colour stays in there, and again, it works really well for this pulling out technique. Great for grasses. Look at that. You've got grass growing. You know, all sorts of things you can do with it. So you can even dip in that colour because it's so wet. I could dip in it and do this with the watercolour, or make a well of the colour into the palette. This is where the palette's useful. Mix this colour nice and wet in there, then it's easier to make it wet. You know, if this works better for you, then do that instead. So this is really wet. I can then place that on there already wet. Maybe add a bit more water to it, really make it nice and wet, and then do the same thing again. Pull out the colour. If I then add a little bit of the leaf green to it, look at that. So the wetter it is, the more you're able to pull out. It will only happen, obviously, when it's wet. Yeah, so that's called the pulling out technique. Then we've got something called dry brush. Now it literally is a dry brush. So what we have to do is dry the colour in the brush so it's not got too much in it. So I'm going to use some burnt sienna. I need to mix it in the same way, so mix it nice and strong like that. Then get rid of the excess colour. That is still quite wet. Keep going until it's not going into the paper towel anymore. And then hold it sideways rather than on the point. Use it sideways and just do this across the top of the paper sideways like that. This is called dry brush. It's a really nice texture. It'd be really lovely for wood or something like that. Now, say I wanted to add grey, I could do the mix in here, could mix in the palette, burnt sienna in there, with the ultramarine. We did that before. If you can't remember how to make that colour, then look in the notes that you've made before, and that's why they're very useful. A bit more ultramarine. Then dry it off until you've got rid of that colour, a bit more in there, like that. And then again, hold it sideways, go over, so you can go over with another colour. Again, you know, I think that looks like wood. It's great for the sea. Watch, if we use Prussian blue, for instance, make sure it's nice and dry, so get rid of the excess colour, sideways with the brush, and it's really good for the twinkle on the sea. Just go backwards and forwards, practice it. The more you practice, the better. If I add a bit more water and make it a little bit wetter, then I get more colour on, look. So again, it's one of those things you need to keep practicing. A bit more water and get a lighter colour, look, then it's coming through. So it's just letting the paper come through. As I say, it makes really good sea or water, the twinkling on the water. Now, these are now dry. I'm just testing it. Actually testing the dryness by using the heel of your hand is a really good way of testing because it's quite sensitive. Same with that. So what I'm going to do is use the wax crayon again, and I'm going to go over and put some patterns on, so lines maybe, some squares. Again, you can't see what you're putting on there, so you have to you know, just realise where you've been before. I'm going to go across like that. Then you need a darker colour, otherwise it won't work. So I'm going to use the Viridian and then go over, and it resists. So we get the wax has resist over the top, and we get the pattern coming through. So really quite useful for all sorts of things that we can do with that. And the last one is what we call lifting off technique. What you need is a damp brush for this, not wet, not dry. So just get rid of the excess again like that, and then do this. So with the point of the brush, I'm going to go up and down, up and down, up and down like this a few times. Then get a dry, clean paper towel, place it over the top, do that, and lift off. So it hasn't worked so well, and I think that's because this is a staining colour. So if we were to use another colour, it would work better. So let's practice that. I'm going to use ultramarine this time. This is more of a natural colour, so it's not quite as staining. But we need that to dry before we can do the lift-off technique. Meanwhile, that bit on there, dry it off on here, add it to your sea. Practice that a bit more whilst it's drying. See if we can get that looking more like the sparkle on the water. And what you could do as well is start writing some notes underneath all of these techniques. So, wax resist method, wax resist on another colour, make a note that needs to be dry first, place the colour for the lifting off technique, write that that's a staining colour and that's why it hasn't lifted off very well. On here, the pulling out technique. Now I'm going to show you something else here because I can see that this colour has pooled. Can you see it's very, very wet there? If I'm not careful, that will cause a dribble. That can be lovely and it can be used. But if you don't want it to happen, what you can do is just very carefully do that. Look, it's like capillary action. It's going into the paper towel or dab it like that. And then that will take the pool away. And that reminds me of another technique that we can use whilst we're waiting for this ultramarine to dry. So Viridian again, or any colour you want. Maybe practice putting another colour into it, so ultramarine in there, like that. Then let it dry just a little bit. Scrunch up your paper towel like this and lift off. This is another lifting off technique like this, and you get these really interesting patterns like that. Nice texture. That's now dry enough, I think. Again, you need a clean paper towel, so I've got a clean part of my paper towel there ready. Wet the brush, dry it off, use the point of the brush, go backwards and forwards like this a few times. It needs to be dry, otherwise you might lift off the rest of the colour. Place that on top, press down, that's better. So we've got the lifting off technique working there. You know, maybe a bit more. So if you wanted to get rid of something, you do this. It needs to be damp, not wet. And then lift off. So that's lots of techniques done, and now we're going to put them into practice by painting a flower.